200 years ago, some were watching the thermometer. BBC2's Hot and Cold Night.
The severe storms have continued to pound southern and western parts of Britain, and forecasters are warning of sleet and ice tonight.
The planet faces a major threat.
Fish are jumping.
Our climate is changing. It's getting dangerously warmer. By the year 2100, it will be warmer still. Before then, some countries will be desperately short of water. In others, miles of coastline will be swept away. And we're in for a lot more extreme weather. Severe storms, floods, droughts. The danger signals are all around us. This is the story of the 7 key moments that have made us realize just how serious a threat global warming is.
Summer in the city, back of my neck getting dirt and gritty. Stand down, isn't it a pity? Doesn't seem to be a shadow in the city. All around, people looking.
Washington, the hottest day of 1988. The US Senate Energy Committee heard startling new evidence from leading climate scientist James Hansen. What he said was to set alarm bells ringing around the world.
That day in 1988, June 23rd, I do remember it was an extremely hot day. It was approximately 100 degrees in both New York and Washington. My testimony was in the afternoon, but in the morning I was at a scientific meeting. I remember the chairman of the meeting said, it may be getting warmer, but no respectable scientist would say that there's a connection between the greenhouse effect and the observed warming. And at that time, I was still writing down my summary for my testimony that afternoon, and I looked up and said, I don't know if he's respectable, but I know someone who's going to make that connection.
And 1988, so far, is so much warmer than 1987 that barring a remarkable and improbable cooling, 1988 will be the warmest year on the record.
I said 3 things. Number 1, the world was getting warmer, which I claimed could be said with 99% confidence. And number 2, I said that global warming was probably due to increasing greenhouse gases. And thirdly, I said that in our climate model, with global warming, there's an increased tendency for droughts, heavy rain, and floods.
Altogether, this evidence represents a very strong case, in my opinion, that the greenhouse effect has been detected and it is changing our climate now.
This was dramatic testimony. For the first time, politicians were confronted with hard evidence that the world was getting dangerously warmer. Sophisticated computer modeling showed that recent rises in temperature were part of a consistent and alarming trend. Hansen's warning had all the more impact as it coincided with one of the worst droughts in living memory in the US Midwest. Suddenly, global warming shifted from the backwaters of science to the mainstream of politics. The dangers of a changing climate burst onto the front pages. Within months, the United Nations set up a new world body to tackle global warming, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC. One man's evidence had sparked an intense debate about how we should protect our planet in peril.
Of CO2 emissions.
The origins of global warming go back more than 100 years. April 1896, Swedish professor Svante Arrhenius came up with a novel theory that temperatures are affected by carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Arrhenius was the first person to link climate change to industry's emissions of carbon dioxide. He predicted that if carbon dioxide levels doubled, the temperature of the planet would rise by 5 degrees. He was building on the work of French scientist Jean-Baptiste Fourier, who first suggested that the Earth's atmosphere trapped heat. He likened it to a glass bowl, letting the sun's rays and warmth in, and then preventing the heat escaping again. Though at first few people believed Arrhenius, his discovery became a landmark for future generations of scientists.
What made him different was, A, he did a calculation, and B, he also said humans, through the use of their fossil fuels, might affect things. So in essence, he deserves the title of being the founding father of the global warming debate, because global warming is not about the natural greenhouse effect. It's about the augmentation of natural gases with human-produced kind, where we use the atmosphere as a sewer and dump it. And he calculated that we might make a difference, although he saw it as being pretty far away.
The long, hot summer.
The motorization of our economy, so new, so powerful, so revolutionary is this force that we have hardly been able to appraise its influence.
March 1958. A young scientist in San Diego set out to find the first scientific proof that carbon dioxide levels were rising dangerously. Everyone else, he said, was underestimating the problem.
All these measurements were misleading, and I mean all of them. When I first made this pronouncement, I was 27 years old, and I was just past my schooling, and I was telling these people that the whole field was pretty badly screwed up.
Scientists had been measuring carbon dioxide in the air for decades, but Keeling insisted their readings were failing to give accurate results. He was convinced he could set the record straight.
My data were sufficiently compelling, and I got to a couple people, you see, like the director of the Weather Service and the director at Scripps, and persuaded them that these measurements were probably right and all the others were wrong, and they gave me a chance.
Keeling took his chance. To record his measurements, he went to a new, more reliable place, Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii.
This location sits out in the middle of a huge ocean, away from contamination sources of carbon dioxide, which would have interfered with trying to determine what is going on in the world's atmosphere. If you had to have picked a spot anywhere which would have given a representation of the whole world with one single site, Mauna Loa Observatory is probably about the best choice.
Into this ideal environment, Keeling introduced the technology that would bring him his breakthrough. Readings were taken every 10 seconds for the next 40 years. The results provided dramatic new evidence for global warming. The so-called Keeling curve shows that levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere have risen alarmingly since 1958.
The increase in carbon dioxide since I started my measurements is twice the total amount of CO2 that was added to the air prior to that. So the 40-year record now is captured enough that we can be pretty sure that we know how to represent the effect of carbon dioxide on the greenhouse effect.
You can't touch this. You can't touch this. You can't touch this. You can't touch this.
The 21st of May 1990, I had this great challenge of presenting the findings of the IPCC working group to Mrs. Thatcher's cabinet. I think it was rather unusual for the cabinet to actually have a scientific presentation of this kind in the cabinet room. I had about 15 viewfoils, you know, with an overhead projector. They couldn't remember an overhead projector ever being used before in the cabinet room. This was a big challenge to put it over in a way that would be interesting and informative for them. I was told that I would be interrupted lots of times during my presentation. In fact, I spoke for 20 minutes. I was not interrupted at all. They listened in silence, but they did listen.
What stunned the cabinet into silence was the overwhelming consensus in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's first report. Scientists from around the world now agreed that greenhouse gas emissions posed a serious threat.
The issue of climate change had, of course, been known throughout the 80s, and with growing confidence, we were getting, the modelers were getting more confident in their results. Our understanding of the oceans was better. The ocean circulation could be folded into the predictions. The influence of clouds was better understood. So there was quite a lot to write about in that first report. Even more than writing about the science, we were very concerned to get the presentation in a very clear, accurate and honest way. And in particular, we wanted to explain what we knew and what we were certain about. We were certain that climate was changing. We were certain about that the Earth was getting warmer because of the burning of fossil fuels and increase of carbon dioxide. We were certain that there was a problem there to be faced, although we were pretty uncertain about much of the detail.
I think the first scientific assessment of IPCC served, if you will, as a club. It was a club in the hands of those world leaders who had to occasionally brush off people who came along and said, oh, it's all phony, it's not real, it's not true science, it's just a few entrepreneur scientists. And IPCC said, no, it's not. It's hundreds of scientists who've been reviewed by hundreds more who are not asserting they have the truth and the answer, but they have a pretty good likelihood of substantial change. And that was very scientifically compelling. In fact, it was politically compelling because so many scientists from so many countries were involved, and they were very circumspect and careful in the way they stated it. And as a result of that, the bulk of world leaders accepted that there was serious science here. And that led directly to the Rio Conference on the Environment, setting up the UN Framework Commission on Climate Change, working toward a convention.
2 years after John Horton's cabinet presentation, 118 heads of state met for the UN Conference on Environment and Development in Rio, known by everyone as the Earth Summit. World leaders came to Rio with action in mind, though the high cost of trying to combat global warming made US President George Bush reluctant to embrace change. After much argument, the Earth Summit led to a long-term program of reductions in carbon dioxide emissions. This sparked furious opposition from the Global Climate Coalition, a lobby group funded by big business. Some governments and industries viewed with alarm the concerted effort to reduce demand for fossil fuel. Battle was joined.
Unless we learn otherwise, it will be prudent to suppose that the next ice age could begin to bite at any time.
You're as cold as ice!
The industry lobby drew strength from mistakes climate scientists had made before. In 1974, they had found a new scare. The Earth was not warming, but cooling, with disastrous results.
You never take advice!
Will a new ice age claim our lands and bury our northern cities? It's buried Manhattan Island before, when great glaciers half a mile thick filled the valley of New York's Hudson River.
The warm periods are much shorter than we believed originally. They are something around 10,000 years long. And I'm sorry to say that the one we are living in now has just passed its 10,000 years birthday. The ice age is due now anytime.
The cooling theory identified a quite new culprit, not carbon dioxide, but dust and smoke in the atmosphere.
A man-made dust pall is spreading over the Earth. The use of the soil in a dry country produces dust which the wind blows into the air. This dust, all added together, spreads around the world, blots out the sun, and causes cooling on a worldwide scale.
Early calculations under a set of specified assumptions, which we admitted were not certain, nonetheless showed that if the dust were around the world, it would win, and that it could cool the Earth down by several more degrees if the trends for population growth and affluence growth continued into the 21st century. Several degrees is sufficient, according to other theories at the time, to trigger an ice age. In fact, I agree, several degrees would trigger an ice age. And since the world was temporarily, at least in the Northern Hemisphere, temporarily in a cooling trend, in the 1960s, here this theoretical calculation came along and said, oh, potential ice age possible from human dust. And I got that label pinned on me, even though I was actually just doing the calculations.
As the 70s sizzled past and the world basked in a string of hot summers, all talk of an ice age just melted away. It had all been a big mistake.
What happened the next few years is we studied and found out that the dust is not globally distributed, that it's largely concentrated in industrial areas or in agricultural areas. So therefore, not the entire Earth is covered by it. So the cooling effect was only regional, whereas the greenhouse gas effect was global. The second thing is the early calculation that we did neglected the stratosphere, the high part of the atmosphere where the ozone is. Well, we didn't think that would have much to do with CO2, but like all things in science, you keep checking your assumptions. So I redid the calculations of the stratosphere and said, whoops, we underestimated by more than 50% how much warming there would be.
Every new bit of information which comes along confirms that the ozone layer is being damaged by CFCs and other chemicals, and that if we don't soon succeed in slowing down and then reversing that process, our health and our whole way of life will suffer.
1985, the first indisputable evidence that man-made chemicals were harming the atmosphere. Not a case of global warming, but the discovery by scientists from the British Antarctic Survey in Cambridge of a large hole in the ozone layer.
16th of May 1985 is, I suppose, now notorious because that's where our results were first published, showing that there had been a 30% reduction of ozone over Antarctica in September and October. And this was the first evidence ever put forward that there had been substantial changes in the ozone layer since it had been studied in 1925.
Ozone is a gas in the Earth's stratosphere. It protects us from the sun's ultraviolet light, which causes sunburn and skin cancer. Without the ozone layer, life on Earth would be virtually impossible. What was behind the alarming drop in ozone levels? Certainly not natural causes.
Really, there was no other explanation, but it had to be chemistry. And the only possible chemistry in this situation really had to be chlorine, because that was the only new thing in the atmosphere.
To blame were consumers and their insatiable demands. Chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs, had entered the atmosphere and were depleting the ozone layer. These damaging chemicals were being widely used in aerosols, in packaging, and in refrigerators. But Joe Farman had a problem being heard. NASA questioned whether his rather elderly equipment was giving accurate readings.
The instrument which we used was the Dobson spectrophotometer, invented in 1927, still going strong. It's a very, very precise instrument for measuring the ratio of the intensity of two wavelengths. Now, if you do this twice and take differences, you end up with a signal which depends almost entirely on ozone and not on the other conditions in the atmosphere.
NASA still doubted this maverick Brit. Their satellites monitored ozone too, and their measurements showed nothing unusual.
It turned out that they had put in a little barrier to finding the ozone hole, let's say. They had quite reasonably decided to ignore very high values and very low values and to look at these later. They just wanted to get the main facts straight away, but they had in fact effectively stopped themselves finding it.
In October 1985, NASA came back with their reworked data. Finally, the ozone hole was official. But it was to take another 5 years and a world summit before action was finally taken to reduce CFC production.
Now, thank goodness, with any luck, we should be back to something like an atmosphere people knew before by about 2070. But that's the horror of the situation. An industry in 15 years, just over 15 years, exponential growth, putting the wrong things into the atmosphere, you can end up with a problem which takes 100 years to put right.
November 1995. The ozone hole may have been solved, but the battle between scientists and industry over global warming was just reaching its height. In Madrid, the IPCC was completing its second major report. In charge of a key chapter was Ben Santer.
In the first assessment report in 1990, scientists had felt that we did not know enough in order to definitively say that human activities had contributed to climate change. On the 29th of November 1995, we made a different statement that after full examination of the scientific evidence, we felt that a majority of that evidence pointed towards a human effect on climate. That was what was historic about Madrid.
By now it was clear science had taken a massive leap forward. There was more understanding of natural climate variability, the sun's energy output, and the relationship between the atmosphere and the oceans. Scientists were bringing together climate records from ice cores, tree rings, even corals, all of which hold vital clues to our past climate. And they were beginning to see clear patterns of warming, both at the Earth's surface and in the atmosphere. The IPCC came to a startling conclusion with the words, "The balance of evidence suggests a discernible human influence on global climate." But agreeing that precise wording had not been easy.
The whole meeting struggled for 3 or 4 hours with a single sentence as to how we were going to express the whether we'd seen human influence on climate, how certain were we about it, what was the nature of the evidence. Was it strong evidence? Was it significant evidence? We ended up with the balance of evidence. Did the balance of evidence demonstrate that we'd seen it? Did it indicate that we'd seen it, or did it suggest that we'd seen it? We settled for suggests.
These were issues, subtleties of language that we hadn't even considered, and now we had to consider them.
And when that word discernible was found, this discernible influence on climate, everybody cheered, actually. We'd been struggling for so long to find just the right words to use.
The euphoria was short-lived. Parts of the American press charged Santer with distortion.
Ben Santer was accused of altering the chapter without authority, quite wrongly, quite falsely. But the lobby groups, particularly in the United States, the Global Climate Coalition, really went for him and said he'd broken the rules.
What was so disturbing about the criticism that surfaced after Madrid was that it focused on the integrity of individual scientists. It didn't focus on the science at all. There were things that were said that were clearly untrue, and you would point these things out to people, and they would continue to say them. That is a difficult realization, I think, for a scientist, that there are people out there who are not accessible to reason, who are not truly interested in better understanding the science.
Now the industry-funded Global Climate Coalition went into overdrive, attacking the IPCC and launching their own TV ads.
What do you know about the United Nations proposed climate treaty?
Isn't that about global warming?
It would force the U.S. to cut energy use by over 20%. Gasoline prices could go up by 50 cents a gallon. Heating and electricity prices could soar. And higher energy costs will raise the price of almost everything we buy.
The ads preyed on public concerns about a carbon tax. Industry wanted to make sure that America's rulers saw that as political suicide. But by the time world leaders met in Kyoto 2 years later, reductions in carbon dioxide emissions were firmly on the agenda. The Kyoto Protocol set legally binding targets for reductions in emissions by the year 2010. The aim was to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide pumped into the air by more than 20% below predicted levels. It has taken science 100 years to establish firm evidence of man's destructive influence on the climate. 7 times the world has been shaken by new discoveries. Each time the voices calling for changes in the way we treat the planet have become louder and more persuasive.
If the science is credible, then people will do something about it. If it is not credible, then people will not do something about it. It was encouraging to me that what happened at Kyoto, I think, was a recognition, yes, the science is credible.
Blue skies smiling at me, nothing but blue skies do I see. Bluebirds singing a song, nothing but bluebirds all day long.
Next on BBC2's Hot and Cold Night, have you noticed that things that fly and bite us are bigger and hungrier? Return of the killer bugs is coming right up, right after a quick flash.
When you're in love, my how they fly. Blue days, all of them gone, nothing but blue skies from now on.
The Proms, live tomorrow evening on BBC2 and Radio 3. The world's greatest music festival, brought to you by the BBC.